All
Yeah.
right, Al, what do you have on the agenda? What should we get into first here looking ahead?
Yeah, just so let's talk about UFC 259 that's coming up 2 weeks from now, and Israel Adesanya, Jan Behovets, Peter Yan, Aljamain Sterling, Amanda Nunes, Megan Anderson, and I tweeted out this earlier. If you take away all of those fights, the remaining bulk of this card, besides those three title fights, is a pay-per-view. You know what I mean? We're seeing Askar Askarov versus Joey Benavidez, Casey Kenny versus Dominic Cruz, Thiago Santos versus Alexander Rakic. It's unbelievable, this card. I didn't say it last week. I tweeted it, but I will say it now on the show. This might be the best UFC card ever. Like at the level that the UFC is at now, this might break all of it. This might be Khabib McGregor. You know, this is, I think this is it. And I this is such a good card for betting. And I'll say this: Askar Askarov is going to beat Joey Benavidez, and you're getting -115 on Askar Askarov. I've made that bet. I'm heavily in on Askar Askarov, and then Casey Kenny. Casey Kenny against Dominic Cruz. I just don't see how Dominic Cruz deserves to be. I just don't see how Casey Kenny is only a -120 favorite against a guy who's fought twice in the past 4 years in the UFC. There's no reason. And besides that, we'll get into what I think about Israel Adesanya and Jan Blachowicz, and then Megan Anderson and Amanda Nunes. The fight's almost unbettable, right? There's almost no angle to come at it unless you're betting the underdog, which I think you're just throwing money away, to be honest, if you're betting the underdog there. And then Peter Yan and Aljamain Sterling. And me personally, this is a fight that I really haven't looked into. I'm super hyped for it, but as far as like from a betting perspective, I just haven't looked into it. So what do you think about this fight?
Oh my God, dude. I've been thinking about this fight for months, and I'm not kidding. Thus far, I think this fight is so hard to try to pick a winner. Like, both dudes are so tremendously on point. I mean, I'm all in on Petr Yan, okay? This dude has showed levels of striking. I mean, he's just got some nuances. He's got some tricks up his sleeve. He basically every fight shows me a thing or two that I've just never seen before. Some of the angles he uses, some of the feints he'll use. I mean, this is a guy who will follow up a head kick, will half feint a head kick to follow over the top with the same side hand. Like, I mean, he outright hits guys with stuff that, I mean, he's the champion, right? So everyone he's fighting is at a champion or challenger level, right? He only fights the best of the best. And he's hitting these guys with stuff they've just never seen before, they've never trained before. I truly think he's on another level. But at the same time, Aljamain Sterling, a guy who's only taken, some losses, a couple losses in his career, albeit slightly disappointing losses. I think this is a kid who was really, really hyped up really early on in his career. And here we are years later, he's finally getting, to that point that a lot of people thought he would get to. And while it's taken some twists and some turns, here he is knocking on the door, of the 135-pound championship. And this kid's grappling to go out there, take down Corey Sandhagen, and take out a guy. I mean, look at what Corey Sandhagen has done to literally everyone except Aljamain Sterling for him to take him out with such ease. I mean, he made Corey Sandhagen look like he didn't deserve to be in there with him. So I think it really comes down to Is Aljamain Sterling going to be able to use the wrestling and get Petr Yan on his back and, use a heavy top game and be able to transition to the back to look for the RNC or just to find a sub in general? Man, I really don't know, because Petr Yan, a Russian, we got to start there, right? I mean, wrestling's just part of the culture. You're gonna have a hard time finding a Russian who can't wrestle, right? But Petr Yan's also just showed some really slick stuff in the grappling. I immediately think of that really weird trip throw takedown he hit on Jose Aldo when they were up against the fence. I just think, Petr Yan's going to be prepared, but man, I don't know how I lean. I think I lean ever so slightly Petr Yan, but Al, do you have the betting odds brought up? What are the current odds set on that fight?
One moment. I believe off the top of my head it's a pick'em, but let me just confirm here.
And I wouldn't be surprised, man. I would not be surprised at all, because I think I lean Yan right now as it stands ever so slightly. It's been a long time since we've seen Sterling falter, but Petr Yan's only lost one fight in his career, and I mean, that fight in itself kind of has an asterisk. Go back and watch that fight. He may have won it. And not only that, the guy he did lose that fight to is now in Bellator, and he's absolutely just tearing it up over there. So I'm going to have a tough time getting off Petr Yan. Sorry, Al. I know you're trying to tell me the odds.
No worries. I think it opened at a pick'em, and it's now Jan is taking money -135 to Sterling +125. And I got to agree with you. And I think that I kind of see it. I see it differently. Like I got to this just off the top of my head while you're talking about it. I think that the loss to Marlon Moraes for Aljo is concerning. And I know that was, almost 4 years ago or 3.5 years ago. It's still, it's that kicking game. And if Aljo's going to try to shoot in, and I think that Petr Yan is, he knows how to time knees, time shots for the takedown. It just depends on how Aljo's going to approach it. But yeah, off the top of my head, I think I got to lean with you in that one with Petr Yan. I think this is one of those fights where the odds are probably closer than the fight should be.
Do you think so? I think they're pretty spot on, man. Don't get me wrong. The fight could play out. Listen, the fight could play out. Aljo could go in there, take this dude down, and find the sub right away. Make it look like Petr just doesn't have, the takedown defense to hang with him, or the grappling. We don't really see Petr Yan do a lot of grappling. He wants to stand and bang at distance. At the same time, we could see Petr Yan, I think, totally outclass Aljo on the feet and look like, he's just levels beyond. I just think it's going to be a pretty close, pretty good fight. I think both guys have a path to victory, but I think they both have abilities in the other's, specialty enough to the point where I think it's going to be close no matter where the fight plays out for the majority of the time.
Yeah, for me, I just think that I just feel like I would be more shocked if Aljo won, and I wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like I would be more surprised if Aljo beat Petr Yan based on what I've seen from Petr Yan. I think based on, off the top of my head, probability wise, I think there's value on Jan at that price. Obviously you would have liked to have gotten him at the opening number, but I still think that I could see this line depending on how the public in the lead up to the fight, I could see this closing like -175 for Petr.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you might be right, man. You wanted to talk a little bit more. I mean, listen, we could talk about Nunes. You know what? But let's not. You wanted to elaborate a little bit more. We talked about it last week. You want to talk about this Israel Adesanya Jan Blachowicz matchup. I'm going to let you take the lead on this one because it sounds like you got a part two here on this one. Yeah,
I just, from what I said last week and saying that Israel Adesanya is going to knock out Jan in spectacular fashion, and that, Jan is kind of taking this this miraculous way to get to the spot that he's in. And I think that Israel Adesanya is taking advantage of this miraculous path. And now let's retrace this, okay? Jan Behovets. Okay, so he lost to Thiago Santos by knockout in a fight that he was an underdog in about 3 years ago. Okay, he beat, and we'll say this: he was the B side. He was the B side in that fight. He was the underdog. He was the B side. And then, okay, so he goes from there. He fights Luke Rockhold. He knocks out Luke Rockhold as an underdog.
I backed him in that spot. I like that spot.
Luke Rockhold has never fought again since that night. Okay. So then he beat Ronaldo Souza. He beat Jacare by split decision. He was a minus 160 favorite in that fight.
I backed him in that spot too. I bet him in that spot, and that was an absurdly close fight.
Yes. An absurdly close fight for a guy who was supposed to win. And going into the third round, you could have seen it either way. Right?
Fighting a very old middleweight.
Yeah, and I believe that fight, I could be wrong. That fight was in Europe, I think. I could be wrong, but I think that was a hometown. That was a European fight. I could be completely wrong, but off the top of my head, I think that was in Europe. But anyways, now let's go to the path. Right, the path was so Dominic Reyes loses to John Jones, and it sets up this Corey Anderson versus Jan Blachowicz fight that is basically for the winner. The winner's going to fight John Jones for the light heavyweight championship. And again, Jan Blachowicz is the B side to this fight. He is a plus 220 underdog to Corey Anderson. I backed Jan Blachowicz in this fight, and this is why. So Jan Blachowicz has I don't think that Jan Behovets is he's not a smart fighter. I think he's a great fighter, but he has an advantage over. He had an advantage over Corey Anderson. The advantage is that he's a southpaw. And that's how he knocked him out. Is because of the stance style, and because Jan Behovets is a pretty advanced striker,
right?
And he scoped it out and counterpunched and caught him kind of with a kick and just knocked him clean out, I think, in the first round of that fight. And he cashed as a plus 220 underdog in that fight. So now everything happens the way it happens. Jones relinquishes the belt. So it leads up to the September 2020 fight, which is Jan and Dominic Reyes. Dominic Reyes is a southpaw. Dominic Reyes was the heavy favorite in that fight. Same line, plus 220, I think, maybe even higher. And, last week I called it a fluke, but I went back and watched it. It wasn't a fluke. It was just that was an incredibly bad matchup for Reyes. That kick, he absorbed those kicks in the upper body early in that fight, and it basically just demobilized him and left him open for that same type of shot that he landed on Corey Anderson, where he's like countering a kick on a southpaw that just leads him to his jaw. And it's not like Blachowicz was supposed to win that fight. He was a heavy underdog, more than a 2-1 underdog. He wins that fight. Now we are facing him against possibly the greatest fighter, the greatest striker in MMA history. Okay. You can't even call Israel Adesanya a southpaw. He's not a southpaw. He's not an orthodox. He's a hybrid fighter who can fight in multiple different stances. And yeah, it's simple as this. I saw people in the chat, I saw people in the comments saying, I don't think that Jan is being respected. He shouldn't be a 2-1 underdog as the champ. against Israel Adesanya. It's the same line that he was against Dominic Reyes. So if you don't think he should have been he should be a 2-1 underdog against Israel Adesanya, but you're okay with him being a 2-1 underdog against Dominic Reyes, he should be a 4-1 underdog against Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya should be a heavier favorite, much heavier favorite. And right now, if you're seeing minus 270, I just think that based on the paths of how this fight plays out and what I've seen from Israel Adesanya and what I think he's going to do to Jan Blachowicz, he's going to do the same thing that he did to Paulo Costa. He's just going to turn him into his strikes. He's going to leg kick him. He's going to frustrate him and make him try to come in the same way that Whitaker did, where he's going to come in and Izzy's just going to knock him out in the same type of fashion that he did with Whitaker, where it's going to be a counter punch, where he's going to use Behovetz's own momentum to knock him out. And I think that, going back to what I said last week, Izzy wouldn't be stepping up right now. He has so much to lose. He could go and clear out the middleweight division. There's still fights that he could take. He could possibly have fought in Marvin Vettori again. He could have possibly fought Darren Till again if Whitaker apparently didn't want to fight Israel Adesanya. And I think that Israel Adesanya and Eugene Behrman, the head coach, the head striking coach at City Kickboxing, they charted this whole path out, and they see Jan as the weak link, and this is just a part of their path. And I think that they wouldn't be taking this fight if they didn't know that they had the advantage here. And I think that Jan has been built up to this spot because of his advantage over those southpaws that, we didn't really know until we seen it happen twice. But, again, Dominic Reyes, that was probably the worst performance of his career. Corey Anderson, not even in the UFC anymore. And in fact, if you go back and look, Corey Anderson has a win over Jan Blachowicz way back in the beginning of both of their UFC careers. He beat Ronaldo Souza in a split decision in a fight that he should have won. Great. And he knocked out Luke Rockhold in a fight that Luke Rockhold has never stepped foot in an octagon since then. I think that Jan is, I think that he's taken a very fortunate path to where he is right now. And I think that he's, I think he's a great fighter, but I think that Israel Adesanya is multiple times better than him as far as striking goes, and he's going to piece him up and he's going to knock him out. And I'm not even going to say he's going to knock him out in the first round. He's going to knock him out in spectacular fashion. This is not going to be a dog fight. This is going to be, I think it's going to be similar to the Costa fight, where he's just going to, he's going to pick away at him, pick a spot and finish it. And like I said last week, this is the first step of many for him. So I'm not any less confident than I was last week. And from looking into records more, looking at the tape more, I think that Jan is a bit of a fugazi. I think that he's a little bit of not what we think he is, and all the power to him. But I don't think that Polish power is going to get him through against one of the greatest strikers of all time.
Whew, that's a serious take there, Al. Yeah, I mean everything you said, I pretty much parrot. I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. I feel like there's a path to victory out there for Jan Blachowicz, but do I think he goes out there and does it? Nah. Israel Adesanya, like I said, I've said it before, I say it again, this guy casts spells on people, man. They refuse to push this guy up against the cage. They refuse to try to take him down. Instead, what do? They try and stand and bang with the greatest striker unquestionably if one of the greatest strikers we've ever seen in the UFC. So do I like Jan's chances if he goes toe-to-toe with Izzy? No, I don't. And I think he probably goes out there and attempts to go toe-to-toe with Izzy. So, yeah, I definitely got Izzy in that one.